You know what nobody talks about? The real reason some people become loners. Not the surface level garbage you hear at therapy sessions or read in those feel-good self-help books that smell like lavender and lies. Not the they're just introverted nonsense that people throw around like it explains everything. No, I'm talking about the deep buried truth that sits in the chest of every person who prefers their own company. The truth they probably don't even admit to themselves when they're lying awake at 3 a.m. scrolling through their phone, perfectly content in their solitude. And here's the thing that'll make you uncomfortable. It started in childhood, not with some dramatic movie-worthy trauma. Not always, anyway. Sometimes it was quiet, subtle, the kind of thing that flies under the radar because nobody got hit, nobody got screamed at, nobody got abandoned in a parking lot. But something happened, something that really taught them down in their bones that other people are optional at best and dangerous at worst. Stay with me, because what I'm about to walk you through isn't just theory. It's a pattern, a blueprint, an invisible script that was written in invisible ink across their childhood. And now they're living it out without even knowing. They're following stage directions. Picture this. A kid, maybe 5, maybe 7, doesn't matter, sitting in their room. They're upset about something. Maybe a kid at school said something mean. Maybe they're confused about why dad hasn't smiled in 3 days. Maybe they just feel heavy and don't have the words for it yet because they're a freaking child. And emotional vocabulary isn't exactly a thing when you're still learning to tie your shoes. So what do? They go to a parent. And here's where it starts. The parent. Let's be generous and assume they're not a monster, just a regular, exhausted, distracted human, doesn't have a bandwidth for this moment. Maybe they're stressed about money. Maybe they're drowning in their own issues. Maybe they're just emotionally clumsy and never learned how to hold space for feelings because their parents didn't do it either. So they say something like, "You're fine," or "Stop being so sensitive," or "I don't have time for this right now." And this one's particularly soul-crushing. They say nothing at all. They just keep scrolling their phone, keep cooking dinner, keep existing in the same room but a million miles away. And the kid learns something. When I hurt, I'm alone with it. Before you think I'm about to blame parents for everything like some armchair psychologist with a victim complex. Hold on. Because this isn't about blame. This is about patterns. This is about what gets passed down generation after generation like a cursed heirloom nobody asked for. But here's the twist. This moment, it doesn't just happen once. It happens again and again and again. Different scenes, same lesson. They try to share something exciting, shut down. They try to express frustration and dismissed. They try to be vulnerable, mocked, or ignored. And somewhere in that repetition, in that loop of reaching out and getting nothing back, the kid stops reaching. They learn to self-soothe. They learn that crying into a pillow is more reliable than crying to a person. They learn that their own company is predictable while other people are not. And that, my friend, is where the loner is born. Not in a single traumatic moment, but in 1,000 tiny abandonments that nobody noticed. Players talk about the garbage people say when they try to explain loners. Oh, they're just shy. They're introverted. They need alone time to recharge. Sure, fine, that's part of it. But it's like saying someone's scared of dogs because they just don't like animals. When, really, they got bitten when they were 6 and nobody ever helped them process it. Here's what actually happened. These kids, these future loners, they learned that vulnerability equals danger. Maybe they opened up about something and got laughed at. Maybe they cried and got told they were being dramatic. Maybe they shared a fear and someone used it against them later, threw it back in their face during an argument like a weapon. And you know what's insane? Society loves to act confused about why these people grow up emotionally private. Why don't they just talk about their feelings? Why are they so closed off? Why don't they let people in? Because every time they tried, someone punished them for it. That's why not. With fists, though sometimes, yes, that, too, but with indifference, with dismissal, with that soul-hollowing experience of pouring your heart out and watching someone's eyes glaze over like you're reciting a grocery list. So they stop. They pull the shutters down. They build walls, not because they're antisocial or broken or difficult, but because the walls work. The walls keep them safe. And here's the part that breaks my heart. They start to prefer it that way because inside those walls, it's quiet, predictable. Nobody can disappoint you. Nobody can betray you. Nobody can forget about you. Inside those walls, you are finally in control of your safety. Here's something you might have noticed about loners. They're observers. They don't jump into the middle of things. They hang back. They watch. They listen. They notice everything. The micro expressions, the tension in the room, the slight edge in someone's voice that means a fight's brewing. And people chalk it up to them being analytical or thoughtful. They learn to read the room because their survival depended on it. When you grow up in a home where emotions are unpredictable, where mom might be cheerful one minute and crying the next, where dad's silence could mean he's tired, or could mean he's about to explode, you learn to watch. You learn to scan for danger. You learn to interpret moods like a meteorologist, reading storm clouds, trying to predict which way the wind's going to blow so you can take cover before it hits. This isn't a skill they chose to develop. It's a defense mechanism. They became students of human behavior, not just out of curiosity, but out of necessity. And here's where it gets even more twisted. That skill, that hyper-awareness, it actually makes them better at understanding people than most folks, but it also keeps them at a distance. Because when you're always analyzing, always watching, always staying 3 steps ahead to protect yourself, you're never in the moment. You're never really with people. You're studying them like specimens under glass. And that becomes the default. That becomes normal. Being on the outside looking in doesn't feel like loneliness anymore. It just feels like where you belong. Let me paint you another picture. Her kid who's always the good one, the peacekeeper, the listener, the one who doesn't cause problems, the mature one, the easy child. Parents love this kid, right? Oh, thank God for this one. So, low maintenance. But what they don't see, up to what they never see, is that this kid learned to be low maintenance because asking for anything felt like a burden. They learned that their needs weren't as important as keeping the peace. They learn to shrink themselves to fit into the cracks of everyone else's chaos. And here's the gut punch. These kids often grow up pouring everything into relationships, friendships, partnerships, doesn't matter, and getting nothing back. Or worse, getting crumbs and being expected to act grateful. They become the one who always listens, never talks, the one who always gives, never receives, the one who shows up while others flake. And eventually, maybe in their 20s, maybe in their 30s, maybe not until they're staring down middle age, they wake up exhausted. They realize I've been carrying people who wouldn't even pick me up if I fell. And that realization, it doesn't make them bitter. It makes them a loner. Because they finally understand that solitude isn't loneliness. Loneliness is being surrounded by people who don't see you. Solitude is choosing yourself because everyone else chose themselves first. And once you learn that lesson, once it really sinks in, you can't unlearn it. You stop chasing connection. You stop convincing yourself that this time will be different, that this person will care. You just step back in the silence that follows. It's not empty. It's peaceful. All right, let's go darker for a second, because some of you reading this, you know exactly what I'm about to say. Some loners didn't just grow up with emotionally unavailable parents. Some grew up with parents who actively punished vulnerability. Maybe you cried and got told to toughen up. Maybe you expressed fear and got called weak. Maybe you showed excitement and got mocked for being too much. Maybe, and this one destroys people, you opened up about something painful and it got used against you later, thrown in your face during arguments. And let me tell you, Something about that kind of upbringing. It doesn't just make you guarded. It makes you evolve. Because if the people who were supposed to protect you turned your honesty into ammunition, why the hell would you ever trust a stranger with it? You wouldn't. You don't. So, you learn to keep everything inside. You smile on the outside. Not a long play. The part, but inside. Inside, there's a whole universe of thoughts, feelings, fears, dreams, and nobody gets a visitors pass. People take this for being mysterious or deep, but it's not. Only this. It's armor. And the tragedy is that armor works so well that eventually you forget you're even wearing it. You forget there was ever a version of you that wanted to be known. You just exist alone, safe, and the world keeps spinning, and people keep asking why you're so hard to read, and you just shrug because explaining it feels impossible because the truth is too heavy and they wouldn't get it anyway. So you stay a loner not because you hate people, but because people taught you to hate being vulnerable. Here's where it all comes together. All these patterns, all these little childhood lessons, they build something, an identity. The loner isn't someone who ended up alone. The loner is someone who chose solitude because it became the only thing that felt peaceful. And I need you to understand that's not the same as hating people. It's not unsocial. It's not cold. It's survival intelligence. When you grow up learning that people are unpredictable, that they'll hurt you without meaning to, that they'll take and never think to give back, that they'll judge you for feeling, they'll ignore you when you're breaking. What else are you supposed to do? You protect yourself. You create distance. You say no to plans, not because you're rude, but because you already know how it'll go. You'll show up, play the part, come home drained, and feel more alone than you did before you left. So you skip the middle part. You just stay home. And it's not sad. Not to you. Because in that space, in your room, in your routine, in your own company, you finally get what you never got as a kid. Reliability, predictability, peace. Nobody's asking you to perform. Nobody's draining your energy. Nobody's disappointed in you. You're just you. And that feels like the safest place in the world because it is. Here's what people who aren't loners will never understand. You're not missing out. You're opting out. There's a difference. Missing out implies you want something you can't have. Opting out means you looked at what was being offered and said, no thanks. I'm good. You watched people exhaust themselves, maintaining friendships that felt like work. You watched them compromise who they are to fit into groups that don't even really see them. You watched them say yes to things they hate just to avoid being alone. And you said that's not for me. Not because you're just scared. Not because you can't do it. But because you know better. You know that being alone with yourself is better than being surrounded by people who make you feel alone anyway. You know that 1 hour of genuine solitude is worth more than 10 hours of forced socialization. You know that protecting your energy isn't selfish. It's necessary. And most importantly, you know this. The relationship you have with yourself is the most important one you'll ever have. And you refuse to abandon yourself just to make other people comfortable. That's not a flaw. That's wisdom. Most people spend their entire lives trying to learn. You just figure it out early. Let's get real for a second. If you're a loner reading this, you probably spent years having people try to fix you. Therapists asking why you don't put yourself out there more. Friends saying you're too closed off. Family members worried you'll end up alone. And you know what? They don't get it. Because here's what they're missing. You're not avoiding people because you're broken. You're choosing solitude because it's the most honest relationship you've ever had. Solitude doesn't lie to you. It doesn't promise to show up and then flake. It doesn't pretend to care and then ghost you when things get real. It doesn't drain you and then act confused about why you're tired. Solitude is loyal in a way people never were. And yeah, maybe that came from a childhood where people should have been reliable, but weren't. Maybe it came from learning that the only person you could count on was yourself. But you know what's actually crazy? That lesson probably saved you. Because while other people were out there getting their hearts broken over and over, chasing connection with people who didn't deserve them, burning themselves out, trying to make one-sided relationships work, you were learning to be whole on your own. And that's not weakness. That's survival. Intelligence. So yeah, maybe your childhood wired you this way. Maybe you became a loner because trust got broken early and often. But the result, you became someone who doesn't need others to feel okay. Someone who doesn't crumble when plans fall through. Someone who built a life that doesn't depend on other people showing up. That's not sad. That's powerful. And anyone who tells you otherwise just doesn't understand what it took to get here. You know what's powerful? Understanding the pattern. Because once you see it, once you really see how your childhood programmed you to choose solitude over connection, you stop being a victim of it. You become the person who knows. And that changes everything. Listen, I'm not here to tell you that being a loner is wrong. I'm not here to push you towards some fake forced version of connection that makes you miserable. Screw that. If solitude is genuinely where you thrive, then own it. Build a life that honors that. Stop apologizing for it. Stop letting people make you feel broken for preferring your own company. You're designed differently. And yeah, maybe that design came from survival, but it's still yours. You're a loner because you learned early that self-reliance was the only reliable thing in your world. And that was smart. That kept you safe. That got you through. You survived. And nobody can take that away from you. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And drop a comment below. Tell me, did you see yourself in this? What childhood pattern shaped you? Let's talk about it. Because the more we understand these patterns, the less power they have over us. I'll see you in the next one. Stay curious. Stay honest.